Welcome to the Upshot, Multi-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I'm the publisher, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Josh Mansfield. Happy 4th of July to everybody celebrating in the United States. I hope everybody had a great weekend and had a chance to maybe get out and play some disc golf. I personally have not played disc golf in like 2 months, which maybe longer, 3-4 months. I don't know what's going on, but I need to rectify the situation, Josh.
It sounds like you do. I know you were on vacation last weekend, but you really just got to start sticking some Frisbees in your suitcase and getting an early morning round in.
That's true. It's true. I could get up, I could get out, I could play the course. I didn't play a single second of disc golf when I was in Utah. Like, what am I doing? But I hope it's not true for you and for anybody out there listening. Worlds is now in the rear view. We're coming up on a new Disc Golf Pro Tour event this weekend, the Des Moines Challenge. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. I think the thing that's interesting about this is that, like, I'm still thinking about Worlds. Like, maybe it's just me, but, like, Josh, are you past it? Are you like, let's move on? It's time for the next thing?
No, it feels almost like the Des Moines Challenge is kind of crowding the dance floor a little bit. I'm like, just wait your turn. You'll get there eventually. Hold on. Give us a couple more weeks. But I know that if Worlds had just been, Paul and Paige dominate, win their sixth title, I'd be like, all right. Let's come on, give us a new news cycle. Like, get something else in here. So it's not their fault. The victim of circumstances.
It's true. So we will turn our attention to that in a little bit. Today, first though, we're going to tackle some mailbag questions. We got a ton of great email over the last couple of weeks throughout Worlds. And, we had a chance to talk about some stuff and talk with listeners on the air during our final round recap show. And we want to just catch up now on a lot of the stuff that's hit the inbox. So without further ado, let's dive in. And I want to jump right into a question from Europe. And it's one that we've heard many times from Europeans. And this one comes from Phineas. I understand where Charlie is coming from when he talks about live versus post-produced. But in this case, we're talking about Worlds. Yes, this year it was in the United States. And yes, the United States is the biggest market. But would you make the same case if it was not anywhere close to your ideal time zones? Again, he's referring to my pro live coverage take here. It sounds a bit myopic. I only comment because it prevents my enjoyment of live coverage. So I'm not trying to get on a high horse here. Just think about the international audience for the sport. So, I'll just jump in really quick. I get it. It's annoying for European players. And in fact, I think we're almost to the point where when decisions get made about tee times and like when broadcasts are going to happen, both the US and European audiences should be kept in mind. Now, I don't know. I don't have the analytics. I don't have the data on viewership from the US versus Europe. I'm sure it still skews pretty heavily towards the United States. Although I will say, historically, Finland has been the number 2 country in traffic behind the United States to Multi-World Disc Golf's website. So that's at least a data point. The bigger issue in my mind is like, we got to put some tournaments in Europe so that things are happening in local time zones in Europe. And it's a lot easier to start afternoon rounds, at whatever time. If you're up in summertime in Finland, up in the north, you're going to have long days. You could start your late tee times 5 o'clock and still have people finishing in daylight. And so you then can still have the United States folks tuning in comfortably in their morning time into the afternoon. So to me, the bigger issue is more like, let's think about the Europeans from a, having tournaments in their neck of the woods department, especially when it comes to the World Championships, and not let's, try to figure out exactly how we're going to appease people who are 7 hours apart in time zones. I get the frustration. It doesn't really change my mind about live coverage.
I agree. I think more European tournaments for sure. But even with Worlds, the 4 p.m. start time, by the time that was wrapping up, you could have caught the back nine in Europe at a pretty comfortable time, if I'm not mistaken, on most of the time zone differences.
You'd have to be an early riser, I think. Because the
A little
tough part
bit.
was is like it's like starting. The rounds are starting at like at best 10 p.m. local time, and maybe 11, and so they're finishing at like 3 or 4 in the morning.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, like if you're an early riser or you want to stay up really late, but it's not ideal. It's definitely not ideal.
And maybe, I know it's not quote unquote live coverage, but maybe the Pro Tour even just delays the stream a few hours so it feels and highlights. But then you have to, do the whole social media avoidance thing. And at that point, why not just watch post? But I think the biggest thing that you hit was just we need more European tournaments. We need the European swing of the tour. We need to make it so that it is an established part of it, and that those have just as much hype, that they're just as important to the Pro Tour scene.
Next question. What you got, Josh?
I want to tackle Jared's question. He says, what are your thoughts on piloting a third genre of courses, specifically for major elite disc golf tournament tests? Open field or ball golf course, but more artificial fairway mandatories, single, double, triple, and green mandatories, USDGC protection, and less lined OB. Effectively doubling down on mandatories, more like croquet and less ball golf. The goal being the technical requirements of a wooded course, yet the stadium feel for spectators and flight watchability of the golf course, all without making it feel like mini golf putt-putt, long-term goal of a Red Bull or Top Golf vibe via USDGC mozzarella sticks.
Okay, so the idea being like, let's get more of a, I don't know, people pillory this most of the time at USDGC. I don't think people particularly care for the what is often called putt-putt style hole designs. But there is a case to be made that by creating more technical shot making in an open environment, you do improve the spectator experience. And I mean, again, like I know I keep coming back to it, but hole 18 at the Fort is such a good example of that, where you have sort of natural challenge with the water carry and then the trees, but then you also have very much a artificial lined OB. Like that hole would be so much easier if there was no OB. But I thought it worked extremely well, and for whatever reason didn't feel unnatural. Maybe because of the spectators lining the fairways and the signs, but it didn't feel like it was just random, which I will have to say, like the Winthrop course can feel extremely random with its OB. The idea of like encouraging more wacky triple mandos and stuff, I don't know. Like I like some triple mandos. What is it? 16 at maybe not 16, 15 at USDGC, where it's like probably about a 250, 300 foot shot through triple mando, and then the basket is like hard left hand turn, and then tucked into the woods. I really like that shot. It's like it does exactly this. It creates like a technical gap in a situation where if you didn't have a mando, people would just throw like weird over the top stuff right to the basket. So I think it has to be used sparingly and effectively. You can't just have an open field and then throw up some like random, literally Jared used the word croquet, like croquet mandos, like go here, like you're driving a drone through the power ups, like you throw the disc over here and then you got to go back over here like slalom. I don't really want to see that, but I do think that used appropriately, it can be an effective way to add sort of challenge and intrigue to a hole.
I think the key word for me, and maybe he doesn't use the word, I thought he did, but now that I go back and read over, I don't really see it. But I think the word for me that you have to avoid is gimmicky. If it feels like it's there for the purpose of just being gimmicky, then I don't really want to see it. And the mozzarella sticks at USDGC almost feel gimmicky. They don't feel like a natural, and I'm all for, I've talked multiple times, I love harder greens, but I don't necessarily think that that's the solution to it, because it just feels like, oh, let's just throw this obstacle up. Kind of like when Waco just changed pars after Macbeth shot the 18 under round, and they just said, oh, this par 5, this is now par 4, congratulations, there are no birdies anymore. You cannot shoot 18 under. Like that just didn't feel, it didn't feel like it was trying to make better golf. Now that being said, hole 17 at Winthrop, hole 16 at the Beast in Nokia, Finland, both of those utilize the hay bale islands that are very much artificial. If you were to remove those hay bales and look at the hill on either course, you would not say, oh, wow, that's an island right there that I have to hit. It's not how it's pictured. It is completely designed by the course designer. And I think it works well. But like you said, it's got to be sparingly, and it's got to be able to create strategy in a way that I think is conducive to the overall round in the tournament, not in a way that's necessarily just designed to how can we punish players even for good shots.
Yeah, and like, here's an example of it done poorly. 10 at Mulligan's. The triple Mando, of course, we had all the drama with, did Paige Pierce miss? Well, we know she missed it. Did she know that she missed it? Blah, blah, blah. The thing is, that hole is bad because it's just like, oh, we're going to have this wide open short hole, and the only way we're going to make this interesting is by adding this kind of weird triple Mando in the middle of nowhere. And like, that is literal croquet. And is that interesting for anybody? It doesn't really yield interesting shots. It's just like, okay, you have to throw a forehand here. And like, if the drama is all about, did somebody miss this Mando that's not sufficiently marked to be clear whether they missed it or not, that's not a good hole. That's just like, we're making it hard. I mean, Katrina Allen talked about it on a radio show in Minneapolis and was just like trashing the hole. And that to me is a sign of like, it's not working. Whereas another triple Mando at those Utah courses, at the Fort, where I forget what hole it is.
Hole 9.
You have the long shot out into the wide open area with an OB creek on the right, and then you have a triple Mando gap at the mouth of the green. Perfect. Love it. Because it's creating this pinch gap, which truly creates more interesting drama on the hole. It means that longer throwers have an advantage. It means that angles get tricky. It means that it's, if you throw a great shot, you're going to get rewarded with a birdie. And if you pinch it off, you're going to get punished with a bogey. And like, that to me is a much more effective use. It also feels more natural in the design of the hole. And so like, that worked great. So 2 triple Mandos at courses 10 minutes apart from each other, a very different vibe for me. All right, next question. Let's go to Andy. Between the Portland Open and Worlds, Kevin Jones is going through a bit of a rough patch with what happened at Worlds on 16 and then what happened at the Portland Open, as we've discussed. I think these 2 events might be the best things to happen to him right now. If I'm Kevin, I'm really frustrated and ready to work my butt off to take my game to the next level. I'm calling it that Jones, after years of everyone thinking he's about to win a major, is now finally at the point where he is going to push through and take his game to the absolute top level, maybe even join the 1050. Josh, your thoughts?
I think it's inevitable that Kevin is going to join the 1050 club, but I don't think it's for the reason that Andy outlines in this question. And it's because I think of the mentality of Kevin Jones. Kevin Jones is a competitor, and he always has that kind of pressure on himself. And I don't think if Kevin Jones really is just frustrated beyond his mind, I don't think that's the environment that Kevin, I don't know, maybe personally, I don't know if that's the idea that he now is just all of a sudden going to work harder or play better because he's frustrated is necessarily true. I think Kevin Jones always works hard. And I don't see this drastic shift in mentality. If anything, I think that more of almost like an Eagle style where you have to learn to control the mental side of the game that comes through discipline is more the side that Kevin Jones needs in order to join the 1050 club. So I guess if you're thinking about the question between, and I guess really just his mental game, where does this put Kevin Jones? I think that this requires a reset of, I cannot let these holes haunt me. I have to continue to play. I have to continue to work hard. And string together a full tournament, a full weekend, and in the final round, especially a full 18 holes without any major mistakes.
I know these hole blow-ups happen close to each other, but they feel very different to me. You know, Portland was like, I mean, obviously was inches away from just making the putt and probably winning the tournament. But, you know, it was like all mistakes of his own volition, right? So he lays up off the tee, or either lays up or throws a horrible tee shot, and then, you know, doesn't just commit to that and, you know, pitch up and try to just take, and whether it would have been a par or a bogey, and now I can't remember, but, you know, just keep it simple, keep it safe. Instead, he tries to run an edge of the circle putt up the hill into a crazy wind, and, you know, gets burned. At Worlds, you know, he misses the island, which a lot of people miss the island, and then got kind of snake bit by catching a brutal roll away after hitting a cage. To me, that's less of it. I mean, yes, he made an initial mistake, but then, you know, 95% of the time, his putt that didn't go in would have just sat right by the basket, and then he just taps in for par, or for a bogey, that is. And, you know, he's probably not going to win the tournament at that point. As soon as he missed the island, he wasn't going to win the tournament. He probably wasn't going to win the tournament anyway. But there are different kinds of mistakes in my mind. And so what's the takeaway? Well, for me, it's that, like, there's weird randomness. And what we've seen from Kevin Jones is that he has the tools to be that guy who does finish consistently near or at the top. My bigger questions about Kevin Jones are the consistency week in and week out, where, you know, like, he'll go stretches where he just has bad rounds, not bad holes, not one weird hole, but, like, just doesn't play good enough disc golf to be in the conversation to win a tournament. That's the question for me, because that's the separator for guys like Calvin and Paul and Eagle and Ricky, who don't do that, right? That's how you get to 1050. You don't have those clunker rounds pulling you down, because Kevin Jones shoots 1060, 1070 rated rounds on a regular basis. The thing is that he also shoots 1010, 1020 rated rounds, and that pulls the average down. So to me, the question is not, can he stop these one blow up holes, which, you know, maybe there's something there. But I think the bigger thing is, can you be consistent week in and week out and find more of that rhythm all the time? And I think it's possible. I mean, in a way, I agree with what Andy has to say, which is that, like, this will be a motivating factor for him.
I think that the mentality or the attitude of Kevin Jones at Worlds was off. Kevin Jones is typically known as, you know, the nicest guy on the course, always complimenting, congratulating everybody. He's always mixing it up with his card mates. And at Worlds, and granted it's Worlds, but I think that players are best when they are in their natural state, right? Natural attitude. For Paul McBeth, that's a killer instinct. But, you know, for Calvin, that's his calm. For Ricky, when Ricky's real quiet and just kind of focused, then that's what you can tell, you know, Ricky's just going on a tear. Kevin typically plays best, I mean, when he's just kind of in that, I feel like, friendly, I mean, just relaxed, playing well, confident. And at hole 12 at Worlds, he went away from the card and just sat down and looked distracted. Like, his mind was somewhere completely other than Worlds. And so I really do think it's just a mentality thing that Kevin's got to get figured out. And I hope this is a motivator for him, but because I love Kevin, I think I really want to see him at the top more. And like you said, he's got the skills to do it, but there's something there in the mental game that I think needs to be resolved.
Here's one from Frank. I fully expect, and shout out to Frank, he sent us like 4 questions. I fully expect to be on a course someday and see kids playing, and one says to his friends, Conrad is 250 feet away, down by one of the world championships. He throws, it goes in, crowd goes wild. And I'm adding this question for you, Josh. Is James Conrad's shot now the one, is it the Jordan moment? Is it the turnaround jumper Kobe of disc golf?
I think it's got to be. And I think the reason why is because with Philo's Albatross, no one throws a 550-foot shot and are like, "Oh yeah, that's going in. Watch this, baby. Here it goes." Like, that just doesn't. That doesn't happen. That never happens. That's why you throw in full court shots. I mean, even there, it's different. But I think the thing about James Conrad's shot and the kind of position that you can be in anywhere from, I think this will be said, from 150 feet out to 300 feet is that happens a lot where it flashes the basket, right? You throw a disc that you're like, oh man, that's so close, even though it's actually 35 away, but it feels close. And so, yeah, I think it does, because it feels something that might happen again. And for a lot of us, it feels like random chance if it does. But I think that it is something that's going to get said, just to kind of congratulate a close shot.
All right.
So
go ahead.
Oh,
you pick.
Yeah. I want to make sure we have time. Ryan sent us an email, and it's a long email, but I think this email is excellent. So there's a couple parts in here that I want to highlight especially. So the first part. I've been chatting with a few seasoned local TDs about all the PDGA noise at Worlds. Generally speaking, they expressed a lot of empathy for Jade and the PDGA, as well as their perception that the players are whining a bit more than usual. It might be that players are using this opportunity to highlight their dissatisfaction with the PDGA by publicly nitpicking when the spotlight on the PDGA is at its brightest. All this with the goal, I assume, of catalyzing some structural changes within the PDGA. So that's the first part. The next part, he kind of talks about how, yeah, that's fair. But then he says, what's interesting to me, however, is that the players do not hold the DGPT to the same standard of accountability. Take, for example, the OB dispute with Paul Macbeth on Maple Hill on hole 8 last year. Steve Dodge got pulled in to talk about it. This begs the question, why is a different standard being applied to the PDGA missteps? Is it Jeff Spring's cult of personality? Is it the professional, consistent quality of Disc Golf Pro Tour events? Their focus on equality for the women's side of the game? All of the above? Players give the Disc Golf Pro Tour the benefit of the doubt, in part due to the contrasting manner each organization chooses to respond when confronted with these complaints. In the Maple Hill example, instead of snippy Twitter remarks, the DGPT issued public rules clarification on hole 8 prior to the next round, and the players and fans moved on. The close partnership between the DGPT and players is one of the key reasons for their renewed success under new leadership. That's part 2. Final part. Speaking of Paul Ulibarri, what responsibility do chairs of committees have for PDGA's behavior and attitude toward the pros? There seems to be a severe lack of coordination between the Players Committee and the PDGA board based on your recent interview with Yuli. In a perfect world, player complaints would be aggregated by the chair and socialized with the PDGA in a close partnership. Perhaps the wonky format of the fourth major would have been nixed if there were more persistent and constructive communication channels open. You could also ask the same question about the quality of recent U.S. Women's Championships. So those are the 3 parts that are addressed in Ryan's email. Which one do you want to tackle first, Charlie?
Wow. And yeah, there's like more to this email. Ryan acknowledging that he agrees with players that the PDGA is ultimately accountable for ensuring even the smallest of details are addressed by the event's local coordinator and TD, and that local TDs are responsible for meeting the standards, and et cetera, et cetera. But went on to make the point that players seem to be holding the PDGA more heavily accountable than the Pro Tour in similar situations. So let me start there. I think that is an interesting point to make. And I think that a lot of it comes down to what Ryan is getting at, which is that the players trust the Pro Tour more. And think about why. When the Pro Tour has events get canceled, and this was a theme of conversations that I talked to pros about this and heard this, maybe not super explicitly, but this is what I was reading between the lines. When the Pro Tour, when we get into COVID, the Pro Tour fires back up and makes almost a full season happen. And there's payouts, and there's a big championship at the end of the year that has the biggest payouts in disc golf history, with $20,000 going to the winners. And the PDGA did not hold any NTs or majors. So I think some players just right there are frustrated with the PDGA because they feel that their ability to earn a living as a professional disc golfer was hindered by the PDGA not holding big professional events last year. And then add to that the PDGA seems to be a little bit prickly about complaints as opposed to more reactive and quick to like address player concerns, which is what we've seen more from the Pro Tour. I don't think anybody expects organizations to never make a mistake. But I think that players expect to be heard and to be, like listened to in a real way. And when things are being brought up before the event, like, hey, you need to paint OB lines, and that's coming from players, and then that doesn't happen, and then, yeah, players are upset. And like Pro Tour events, I mean, we've heard it all year, have we not? Pro Tour events have been seen by players as being more professionally operated. This does not mean that the Pro Tour is doing things perfectly. There were complaints about the T-pads at the Portland Open, the Maple Hill example. There's like rules things that come up at Pro Tour events. But I think the difference is that, number one, the Pro Tour basically explicitly exists in order to facilitate professional disc golf. And so that is their entire focus and their entire team's focus. And when players are upset, that's concerning to the Pro Tour, and they work to do something about it immediately. Whereas the PDGA has a lot of other incentives and a lot of other things going on and a very, very different model of operating events. So I think that players have there's been frustration building for some time. This is also not just out of nowhere. Players have been complaining about, U.S. Women's Championships conditions for many years. And then it comes to a head with a big social media thing. And then you have the PDGA Board of Directors president going on a random podcast to then trash Paige Pierce about it. Like, think about that, right? That whole sequence of events is not what you want. And it's not even like, that doesn't necessarily even represent the belief of the PDGA. Right, there's the PDGA board pres, Justin Minichelli. His term is coming to an end. He's going to be leaving soon. He was sharing a personal opinion, but it again, like, think about that, right? That would never happen from the Pro Tour side. And it's not like the Pro Tour never gets a little prickly. We've seen them pop off on social media a little bit. We've seen them back and forth with Brody Smith. They're touchy about things too, for sure. But I think that the broad approach is much more like, we want to include the professional players at the table here in a meaningful way and make sure that their concerns are being addressed when things come up. And I think the PDGA, yes, they have a players committee, but I think the PDGA, from their side, they're frustrated about how like little the players committee seems to do. And I think the players are frustrated about how little they feel like the PDGA does to listen to them. So I don't know, like, this is why there has to be changes. It's Ryan is right about the communication being a problem. There needs to be better faith communication between the sides. And if it's not working to have a committee, then you got to figure out another way, because whatever it is right now isn't working.
I have two thoughts that I want to highlight with this. The first one is the idea of, did they wait till Worlds because it's the PDGA's biggest spotlight? As you mentioned, there have been complaints about U.S. women's, and that's been the case for years. But at the end of the day, players can skip NT events. Paige Pierce proved it. She did. She just didn't go to NT events because of the way the PDGA had handled certain issues. So Paige has no problem not going to NTs.
Let's note that Paige has the luxury of skipping NTs.
And that's true. That is true.
Player.
Yes. And that is an important clarification. That being said, even the players who have the luxury of skipping NTs aren't going to skip a major. And so that is, yes, the PDGA's moment, but it's also for the players their most important moment too. It's almost odd that the most of the season in terms of the Pro Tour, the defining structure of it, and typically those events that define the pros season are on the Pro Tour, except for the ones that are the biggest, which are the majors, still controlled by the PDGA. And so I think that's the bigger issue, not necessarily that it's a spotlight, that it was calculated or timed, but that the pros are at these majors expecting the highest quality because they are the most important parts of their season. The second part is, I would agree in terms of the idea of the players committee. I think that there's been fault on both sides about how effective it is. And I think that it's necessary that the players utilize both the avenues that they have, including social media, but also the players committee, to ensure the most effective kind of communication. And whether that, means the order in which you do so, or what kind of meetings are structured with the PDGA, or how you take that complaint, something along that process needs to change so that there is clear and defined advocacy. I wouldn't be surprised if the Pro Tour did something similar in the near future, where they created a specific and official line of advocacy for the players directly to their organization. Though I would say that the Pro Tour has been better about handling individual complaints or just general feedback from players, even without the sense of a committee or a necessarily designated individual to do so.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, and Ryan makes some great points. Like, is it totally fair the way that things get handled, like versus the way Pro Tour complaints get handled by pros? You don't see the Pro Tour, you don't see players going out and sniping the Pro Tour for perceived missteps on social media, whereas that's happening with the PDGA. I think there's just more trust with the Pro Tour. They're seeing the Pro Tour people at events all the time. The PDGA folks come out to Worlds for a week, and that's it. It's a lot easier to attack a faceless entity than it is to attack people that you see week in and week out. So the trust side of things is a real component here that, probably that has to get addressed. And there's a lot of ways that this can get addressed. And I think that this is going to in the next few weeks. I think we're going to hear some news coming soon from a PDGA summit that's going to address this in some way or another. And whether that's going to be handing over the national tour operations to the Disc Golf Pro Tour, or announcing changes to the way that they operate majors, maybe both of those things. There are changes coming. There have to be changes coming after this week. There have to be. Okay. Back to the world's courses for a second with Bailey. Regarding the courses, I still think it is essential for the future coverage of the sport to have better statistics on the courses. The top of the list should be scoring separation. I think Steve West's contribution to scoring spread width stat is the best I've heard of for this. Steve West, by the way, does some awesome disc golf analytics stuff. Check it out. But with this comes a decision. Do we want scoring separation or not? We need to make up our minds. Fans, and even more so pros, complain the most about holes where everyone gets the same score. That hole does not contribute well to sorting the players. But heading into the back nine of the final round, fans change their tune. Now they love it when there are 4 or 5 players in the mix. Which is it? Do we want holes and courses that sort players? Or do we want several players within a stroke or two coming down the stretch? I'm guessing your answer is somewhere in the middle, and I'd love to hear what you think that looks like.
I definitely like the closer separation. But here's the interesting thought experiment, I guess, I want to kind of bring into the mix. Because I think of another course where the scoring separation was pretty close, if I remember right, but did get some critique from fans for being boring, or just for over 3 rounds. That's just something they really didn't want to watch. It was hard to keep them engaged over those 3 rounds. And I think of the Preserve Championship, where normal scores were 14 to 16 under, but everyone was close to 14 to 16 under. I mean, there were still 4 or 5 players going into final day that could have won that pretty cleanly. And I guess it's not quite as deep. But why is it, I guess, a course that sticks to, 10 under is the hot round and is an incredible round at the Fort, for example. and keeps everyone kind of close between the 6 to 8 mark. And we love that. But then a course that shoots, if it was 16 to 17 under par, but you have 10 players all shooting that, then it's not as big of a favorite, because of the idea that par is just a number. I guess the big thing that I want to say before I, with that thought experiment, let you kind of talk about it a little bit, because I don't know if I have a sufficient answer, is that the holes can't just be easy for every player. I think what's nice about it, right? It can't just be that it's easy. It needs to, everyone gets the same score because they execute it well, or they have to do some sort of heroics in order to get it, right? That if you get punished, and that every hole has the opportunity to punish you. I think that's what I liked about the Fort, is there was a hole 2, is like 180 feet. And the gap through it to the basket isn't huge, but if you were to put any pro in a field 180 feet away with a gap that big, they would never miss it. 100 times out of 100, they would not miss that shot. And yet we saw in the final round, I think one of them went OB and 2 were down by the river. Only one had made the actual island area. And so I think that, the Fort's easiest hole had the capacity to punish players and push them to par. And so I think what has to happen is birdies have to be possible but exceptional on every hole. And when you do that, then you get players who play several holes exceptional. They get their birdies, but then par. And this is kind of like golf. I mean, birdies are a lot harder in traditional golf.
Sure.
And once you play it perfectly, then that's how you pull ahead, is by getting birdies and avoiding those bogeys, rather than getting every birdie and avoiding pars. So I think that's the big difference in my head. But what are your thoughts, Charlie?
Here's my thoughts. I want both. I want scoring separation on holes, and I want a lot of people in the mix in the final round. Are those things incompatible? I would argue that it's not incompatible. Here's why. What courses need to do is have holes that separate players, but the holes need to be different and challenge different skills. There should be holes that require you to throw far. There should be holes that require you to throw tight down a tunnel. There should be holes that require you to throw a forehand. There should be holes that require you to throw an Anheuser backhand, and on and on. If a player successfully is able to be the best in all of those categories and pull away and win with a dominant victory, well, then good for them. But I think a lot of the time, players have different skills. Players have different abilities. Even the top 10, 50 guys aren't always going to be the best at X thing, whether that's throwing a forehand or whether that's throwing a tight wooded shot or whatever the case may be. So I don't want to see holes where everybody gets a par. That's boring. What I want to see is holes that separate skills. And when you aggregate all of that, you end up with players with close scores, because the players who have long arms do well on this set of 6 holes. The players who throw great forehands do well on that set of 6 holes, etc. This is where we have to go. I think the best courses already do this well. They already have these varying shots, and we have people up in the mix. And so that's what I want to see. I want to see the variety of skills tested. It's easier with 2 courses because you can just, like, having the, like at Worlds, open versus wooded, obviously those are going to test very different skill sets. And I think that's good. And perhaps that's in part why we had tight contests. If we play mulligans 5 rounds, how big is the lead for Pierce and Allen going into the final round? I mean, it would be comical. It wouldn't even be close. But the fact that we had rounds at the Fort meant that scores stayed tighter, because Paige isn't as good in the woods. She's not as good as hitting the gaps. She gets punished by the aggressive play. So that's what I want to see. I want to see the players get rewarded for being able to pure lines and hit putts. I also want to see the players like Paige Pierce be rewarded for being able to throw 475 feet. They should be. That's maybe a critique of this World Championships, is there weren't enough holes that valued distance in a meaningful way. And so maybe that's why we had a lot of bunching. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's necessarily a pure trade-off. I think it's about having the whole design varied enough in order to create scoring separation on each individual hole. But when you aggregate that all together, it means that players with different skills can still be competitive. And therefore, you have a lot of people in the mix going into the final round. That's the dream.
That's the dream.
Really quickly, before we answer the next question, credit to Spinny McPutter, that was the name that was given in the email, for picking James Conrad to win the tournament before the event. We got the email. I checked the timestamp. It's legit. He picked James Conrad. Nicely done.
I wonder what percentage had James Conrad at their top. The March Madness brackets that it's like, sure. Oh yeah, once Gonzaga's out, like 3.3% of brackets are left. I wonder how many brackets were left with James Conrad at the top. I really would like to know that.
We got to do bracketology next year and keep track of that. I think that's a great idea.
I think it'd be fun.
Or like some kind of way of tracking, a percentage in the top 5, etc. Here's one from Nathan. After MVP as the biggest winner from James Conrad's victory, Eagles' PR and reputation is a winner. He underperformed, but nobody will remember. Also, Macbeth's class act was incredible. His up and down after James's moment was maybe the most clutch shot of his tournament. I don't really have much to say about Macbeth. I agree. He composed himself well, and in my mind, it was like fated that James was going to win in the playoff. So I think, he looked a little shook, but he certainly gave James Conrad a pound and was very gracious about the whole situation. Let's talk about this first question though. Eagles' reputation is a winner. He underperformed, but nobody will remember. You got thoughts on that, Josh?
I guess what I'm wondering is why Eagle? Why was Eagle the choice of Nathan? And why is Eagle's reputation the one that is? Because what did Eagle do that I don't know Ricky didn't, right? I thought Ricky's social media presence and composure around it and engagement with the fans was perfect. I thought Kevin Jones's was excellent. I thought Kyle Klein really benefited from this. Greg Barsby is still the people's hero. I don't know why after MVP winning from James's victory, Eagle is next on the list. I guess I just don't see. Yeah, I think Eagle composed himself well. I think, but I don't know why. I guess I just don't know why his PRs benefited so much by this Worlds. Do you have a different thought on that?
Well, the one thing I will say is that I think, like I said during the tournament, I think it's time to kill the Eagle can't play in the woods meme. Let's just kill it dead. It's dead. It needs to be killed. He does play well in the woods, and he showed it in at least 2 of the rounds at the Fort. Maybe it's still a worse part of his game, much like it is for Paige Pierce, but I don't think that he's, bad in the woods by any stretch. So maybe that's a reputational bonus. I have to say, one of the things I remember from Worlds is that Eagle went on Instagram and complained about the OB lines, which, he's not wrong, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily the time nor the place to be going on after a bad round and complaining about the OB lines. I think Eagle shows you that, pretty much tournament in and tournament out, that he's a tremendously gifted player. And his resilience after having some frustrations during the early parts of the tournament to come back and finish comfortably inside the top 10 deserves credit. But to me, it's he still has work to do to kind of prove that he can go out there and, be that guy, be that champion round in and round out. And, he didn't punch the ground and break his hand or anything, and I think he's growing, and he's talked about that, which I think is cool. I think it's cool to have professional players kind of like going on and talking about things that they're dealing with. And Eagles talked about how his, frustrations can get the better of him at times. So I think that's cool, but I also don't know that I necessarily come away from this tournament feeling like, oh, wow, Eagles really proved something to me. Mostly I just know that he's an amazing player who seems to have bad rounds at inopportune moments at major championships.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was anything special for Eagle, to be honest. I think it was Eagle doing Eagle, so good for Eagle, because Eagle is good, but that's all I got there.
Eagle soars.
Eagle soars. Congratulations, man. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Eagle, not being competitive for the championship is a disappointment, to be honest.
Yeah.
He's got all the tools. One more question. Go ahead.
This comes from Frank, who I think was also the one that talked about that we're going to start calling our throw-ins Conrads now, that reenacting the moment. So shout out to Frank. He says, the bedrock of disc golf sponsorship was Innova. Everyone hoped and dreamed of being deemed good enough to eventually make their star team. Then along came the earthquake known as Discraft, stealing away Macbeth, then Pierce. Then we got the aftershock of MVP Conrad. However, maybe Conrad and the throw-in will set off another earthquake in the sponsorship world. Smaller manufacturers focused on a few select players may show those tooling on the JV teams that what they need is a sponsor who is focused on a few elite players. That a player can have a career in monetary success because of their sponsor and not despite their sponsor. Every year it's looking like the old mold of a sponsor giving players just enough to survive until they achieve success that their sponsor then gets to take credit for is inexorably being replaced by true partnerships between player and sponsor. The balance of power seems to be tilting more towards the player, and I'm sure the players are seeing that shift as well.
First of all, this is Prodigy Erasure. Prodigy Erasure. Okay. Let us not forget what Prodigy did to usher in this new era. And maybe they're not the sexy company today, but they changed the game 10 years ago to put this whole new world of players getting more from sponsors into place. So that's just an initial thought. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, well, and I actually was going to bring Prodigy up, but in last season as well, because the Conrad signing was splashy, but look at Prodigy's team. They took a bunch of players and have a bunch of players who probably wouldn't be the elite standout on any other team, but have made them feel like they are highlighted and important players. Thomas Gilbert, for example, Gannon Burr. And then you also have the Kevin Jones and the Chris Dickerson. And then on the FPO side, you've got Katrina Allen. So FPO or Prodigy already runs an incredible team. Also, even before the Macbeth steal by Discraft, you had the Crush Boys on Discmania. So I don't buy, I guess, the narrative of the Innova dominance that is the single monopoly that just controlled the way that players made money in disc golf. I think back, like you said, the 10 years ago with Prodigy, there was break, and it's true that Innova has the biggest team, right? That's we all acknowledge that. And Innova just signs dozens of players, and then does happen to have
the biggest company, and they're probably going to do that for the foreseeable future.
Yes, and so that's definitely, I can understand where that narrative comes from. But I think what I really like focusing on and what's important is the idea of this shift to the player. And I think that it is happening, but largely because of just that, he's talking about the diversification, right? When you can offer an alternative to the pros and offer them something in terms of financial stability or in terms of like Macbeth. And I believe James Conrad also got some say in designing a line of discs. I might be wrong about that. But I think that's kind of also becoming another standard, is that, I want to create my disc that is best for me. Paul Macbeth got to do an entire line. Paige Pierce and the Fierce, for example, creating her, dream putter, as she's called it. So I think, there are perks and financial stability that are coming in the disc golf world. And if a company offers them, I think a ton of players are going to take that over just being on, as he says, Innova's star team, right? Or anybody's star team. And so as you continue to diversify the number of manufacturers who have the capacity to offer those kind of benefits for touring pros and ensure that their pros are touring pros, and assuming that some of those pros are successful, then I think that inevitably breaks the largest amount of power, or at least whittles it down away from manufacturers and gives that over to players. And now the issue is, I think that eventually you're going to come to a kind of a head as to where it's going to have to stop, and like the natural erosion is going to have to become something more created and taken by players, whether that be through agents, for example, public salaries. There are a bunch of ways that other sports have ensured and kind of created this player accountability, like this player power, unions, players associations,
Sure.
Lots of different ways. But I think I would agree, maybe for different reasons, but in the same vein as Frank, as to the diversification then of that power is best for the players over anybody else.
Here's what I think is a little different about the MVP situation. People forget about Discraft, but Discraft was went back in the day. Everybody was on Innova or Discraft. Everybody was, that was it. That's the only two companies for many years. And, Discraft's lineup was packed with players, much like Innova's. And then, Discraft wasn't making competitive offers to players. Many players left for greener pastures. They were mad about it, but eventually, figured out that the only way they were going to win players back was with better contracts. So what did they do? They went out and offered a gigantic contract to Paul Macbeth, and it worked out amazingly. But here's what I think is different today. It's not just the Innova and the Discraft. It's also the MVP, which, didn't have many, if any, marquee players signed besides Sarah Hokum to this point until this year. And you got to imagine, I don't have their sales data, but you got to imagine that this is already paid off. And I think the thing that makes this interesting is that a smaller manufacturer or disc brand, whether or not you make your own discs, can think about, it is worth putting a ton of chips into this one player basket because it will have that much of an impact on sales. Like, this is what DD is going to do, right? Dynamic Disc is about to come out whenever they can next and throw down a big pile of money at a top free agent.
Huge.
And it will likely pay off. Calvin Heimberg in 2 years or something. And I also think that players identify that there's benefits with doing this as well. They talk to each other. I'm sure James Conrad feels much more like the star than he ever did playing for, funnily enough, the star team on Innova, because it's different when you're the guy versus you're one of the guys. And that's not to knock the way that Innova's doing this. They have a tried and true history, and I think they also provide a ton of support to a lot of players who wouldn't necessarily be able to command these kind of bigger contracts from, a single manufacturer, a smaller manufacturer like an MVP, for example. Like, MVP is not going to throw down James Conrad money at, the
Mason
10th
Ford.
best player on Innova's team, right? And those players are benefiting a great deal by having Innova there to say, you're a great player. We believe in your potential. And if you play well, you move up on our team and get rewarded for it. So Innova has kind of set the standard for what that looks like. And I think it's important the way that they've approached this. But I do think we've seen probably a paradigm shift in players having more agency in terms of defining the contracts that they get instead of just taking what's offered, as well as having a lot more say in, how they want it to be structured. Like, contracts are getting more creative. It was used to be you get discs and you get entry fees paid and you get some money for touring. And now it's like, we give you this stipend every month. And, like Thomas Gilbert has access to personal trainer and mental coaches as a part of his contract with Prodigy. And, so on and so forth. So I think that the kind of more creative contract design is going to be another thing. And ultimately that does benefit the players. This is a marketplace, just like anything else. Players are going to get what companies feel they are worth. And if there's a bidding war that it goes well for the players, that bidding war is only going to come out there for maybe 10 to 15 total players in the sport. So also worth keeping that in mind. Do the players who are ranked from 25 to 50 deserve to have endorsement contracts? I don't know. Deserve is an interesting word. This is not team sports where they have to have a team of players. This is, we want to sell discs, you help us sell discs, and we'll sign you to a contract. So it's an interesting time, and I think, honestly, I do think that there's just more opportunity for the top players right now to get those kind of fancy contracts and bigger contracts than for players who are ranked below 15th in the world. All right, that is going to do it for our mailbag segment. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to go inside the circle, and we're going to talk about the Des Moines Challenge and make some picks. Stay with us. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. If you got a Pound bag, you can also get a Pound Ambassador patch out now. You want to rep your favorite Pound carrying pro? Well, they've got patches, $10. 100% of the profit from each one sold goes directly to the ambassador. So whether you want to rep Nate Sexton, Kona Panis, Jeremy Coling, Lisa Fakis, Dustin Keegan, Scott Withers, or Zoe Andike, they've got the patches up on PoundDiscGolf.com. Go check them out. Welcome back to the Upshot. We're going to get ready for the Des Moines Challenge on the Disc Golf Pro Tour coming up in just a moment. But first, we're going to go inside the circle. Josh, take it away.
A couple of exciting things coming up. We have the finalized list next week for the Celebrity Pro-Am Invitational. This is going to be July 13th. This is something the Disc Golf Pro Tour had mentioned and announced several weeks ago, but we now have our list for the celebrities that we're going to be seeing. Unfortunately, it doesn't include any famous golfers that I know a couple people were hoping for, but still some big names on there. So for our celebrities, we have Ben Askren, Jordan Wisely, Stephen Thompson, Andrew Zimmern, Julian Marquez, Terry Miller, Dylan Cease, and Casey DeSmith. And for the professionals, Charlie, I want to get your opinion on this because I think there's a little bit of some interest in terms of the picks that they've got on the professionals. We've got Brody Smith first on the list, followed by Paul Macbeth, Simon Lizotte, Ricky Wysocki, Eagle McMahon, Paige Pierce, Kevin Jones, and Katrina Allen. And again, this is going to be hosted at Ben Askren's Funky Farms disc golf course. So, Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Interesting. Well, a lot of MMA. So Ben Askren pulling over the MMA boys. Cool to see Dylan Cease there. Talk to him. I talked to Andrew Zimmern as well, who's a super fan. I mean, that guy is all about playing some disc golf and like plays all the time and is like super geeked to be going to this event. So, I mean, this feels like the kind of the right mix of kind of random people for the first ever disc golf celebrity pro-am. Like, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that they were going to pull Charles Barkley or something out of the woodwork. But I think, you try to get a start with something like this, and then maybe that gives you some clout to pull some bigger names in the future. But, they got the White Sox pitcher. They got the MMA guys. Andrew Zimmern, obviously a television star. honestly, like pretty impressive. Like all, if you really think about it for a second. As for the players they invited, I mean, it's like the list you would expect. I think it's interesting they went 6'2" men and women. You know, I don't really know how you make the choice. That's like tough choices, right? These are not qualified spots. Like Brody being in there, like you get it. You know, Brody being in there makes sense, but it's an interesting decision to have to make, and I'm sure there's some players out there who are pissed that they didn't get an invite. And, you know, should they have gone for men and women? I mean, it's like all guys on the celebrity side. We're still working through these issues in disc golf.
And I think the other thing that's the tricky thing that you kind of have to ask, and I think some people will say, well, what about, you know, the now world champion James Conrad? We don't know who said no. There may be some players who were invited and declined. But at the end of the day, I think that if you look at it, I mean, the Brody channels and Twitter followers, the Simon YouTube vlogs, this is about exposure. That's being frank. It's about getting as many eyes on this event as possible. Yeah. And I think in terms of that, they've got a good lineup for who.
No live coverage.
There. So
only YouTube.
No live coverage. Yes.
I wonder if there was too much to deal with or something. I was expecting to be able to watch this live. I don't know if I was going to tune in on a Tuesday, but I wanted to have the option. So anyway, we'll have to check it out when it comes out on YouTube. Interesting. We'll see how it all plays out.
Next up, this week, so Wednesday, today through Saturday, I guess as we're recording today, coming out tomorrow on Thursday, there's going to be a USDGC qualifier in Norway. The PCS Sula Open was taken off the Disc Golf Pro Tour calendar due to travel restrictions in the Schengen zone. As we know, I was talking about Kristen Tatar and Silverlot and Albert Tom, for example, all who had to go through quite extensive lengths in order to make it to the United States. And while it was removed from the Disc Golf Pro Tour and from the Euro Tour calendar, Innova and the USDGC chose to keep 5 USDGC spots available at the PCS Sula Open with the hopes that those European players are going to be able to travel over by the time USDGC rolls around. So hopefully, because we didn't have quite as much European representation as was hoped for at Worlds, we can maybe get some more of that coming USDGC.
Yeah, I think it's cool that they were willing to do that. It should, you know, Europe kind of got screwed last year. Couldn't go to USDGC at all. And, you know, this is going to be an event that I think does get big, large, impressive fields in the future. Right now, you know, not exactly the deepest field. I think there's maybe 7 players over 1,000 rated. So those players get a chance to qualify for USDGC, maybe players that might not do so in a normal year. And so right now, up at the top of the leaderboard, Stanislaus Amann. So he's got a 2-stroke lead on Blair Orn Asgerson, which I am sure I butchered. But shout out to Blair, Icelandic, real, very talented young player. And thanks to Ola for letting us know about this USDGC fact to the upshot@ultiworld.com email address. So thanks, Ola.
Finally, on Inside the Circle, we have another tournament going on right now. It is the Junior World Championships in Emporia right now. We are 2 rounds in, and you know, we have a show favorite who we've talked about a little bit, Cade Filamahala. Talked about him going into Worlds, being a local Utah favorite. He is currently sitting in 4th after 2 rounds. Rounding out your top 5, you have Peter Calabrese at 23 under, Micah Groff at 18 under, John Montenegro at 17, Cade Filamahala at 16, and Shane McCullen at 14. So I think it's interesting to watch. Oftentimes the Junior Worlds champion is kind of an accolade that we see of players who then are signed typically at a pretty young age going onto the Pro Tour. So, I mean, these 5 names are important. Go check it out if you can during some of the later rounds now that we're into round 3, because this could play a big role in the Pro Tour in the next few years.
Now, I had a conversation with Heather Young, and I want to get your take on this. I was talking to Heather Young at Worlds, and she was like, well, why do I not get to play Junior Worlds? I've taken cash, but I'm still eligible to play. So why don't I get to play? And I didn't really have a good answer. I was like, you know what? You should be able to play. If you're age qualified, it doesn't matter if you're a professional player that's taking money or not. Now, Cade Filamahala, people might be thinking, well, why does he get to play? Well, he hasn't taken money. Maybe because he wants to go out and try to
because he's planning.
Yeah, so
he also, I think, wants to play the amateur championships as well.
Yeah, good for him. But so, I don't really understand the justification there. Like, if you're a great youth player, you should be able to win the youth world championships regardless of whether or not you've earned money or not, in my opinion.
I agree.
Your amateur world championships, but I mean, I guess it technically is.
Doesn't say it, but I guess that's how they enforce it. Don't love that rule either. The other thing I want to point out about Junior Worlds is if we're talking about growing the sport, and especially for the women's side, I think that the junior division is something that is crucial to and a crucial area of focus. On the junior 18 under men's side, I want to say MPO, but junior 18 men's side, there are 72
boys, if we
boys, 72 entries. But the junior girls, there are 9, Charlie. Just at Junior Worlds, there are 9 girls playing. And right now, I mean, it's a 2-horse race by a mile. Melody Castrita is at 12 under par, and Stacy Haas is at 11 under par. Third place, Violet Main is at 1 under. And after that, the next closest person is 8 over par. So it's got very little depth. And I think while there's been a lot of focus on the FPO side of the game, I think that the development for the MPO side begins with the youth. And I think it needs to do the same thing for girls. We got to get girls in the sport and encourage events for them.
I mean, the key, I think, is getting the game into schools more. When we had Yeti here as a guest host on the pod, he talked a lot about the efforts that they're making, particularly in Texas, to get it into more PE programs and into schools. And this is the key. I mean, this is the key. Like, I don't know that you're ever going to really solve the fact, like, I don't know. It's a couple times I've looked up golf's demographics and it definitely skews male. Like, I think maybe the game of golf itself is just like more appealing to men than women. Like, maybe not. I mean, maybe there's structural problems with the sport that we need to solve and it becomes like gender parity. That's possible. But, 72-9, I think that's showing you that like there's just more encouragement for young men to get into the sport, and maybe not. It's not even necessarily there's not opportunities, but it's not being presented in such a way in a school setting where, there is that encouragement to go and play. And I don't really want to like try to solve this problem on this podcast today, but I do think that making more opportunities in PE settings and in schools where everybody's learning about it all together is going to naturally increase that base of, both boys and girls players over time, which is going to trickle up into the rest of the sport.
And I think the one other thing I would just add to that is the other place we've got to look at the way that we can make leagues the most inclusive and equitable as possible. Because I can't imagine how daunting it would be for a junior 18 girl to show up to leagues and have nothing but, men, MPO players who are there and intermediate and advanced. And that's it. And that's who you have to play with on your card. Like that, I think that would be incredibly difficult. And so I think we need to find ways to make leagues inclusive, that everyone feels comfortable, that they feel like they're playing with people who are similar to their skill level and that they are comfortable playing with. And I think because that's where you get competitive golf. Schools, you got to introduce it to them, but you got to give them avenues for competition. And I think leagues is a crucial area to do that. So, yeah,
it's a little chicken and egg too, because like, sure, if you're a league organizer, you could come out and be like, hey, we're going to do an 18 and under league, boys and girls split, starting, Wednesday nights, and nobody shows up, right? Like in a lot of communities, nobody's going to show up because it's just not present for that age group right now because their exposure is to school and school-based sports. So if you don't have it offered, then how are they even going to know about it? So, unless they play with their parents or their, older brother or whatever. So I think that's a big challenge, is that, you can't really get that going. And I agree. It would be intimidating for boys and girls to come out and be playing with, 25 to 45-year-old men mostly. So how do you like make that work? And that's not to say that those people aren't being friendly and like welcoming younger people in. It's just, that's just not how it works. Like you don't play sports with people way older than you typically. So something to think about as we continue to grow. And like, that's such an important part of what the PDGA is working on. And I think it needs to be a bigger focus going forward. All right, let's talk about the Des Moines Challenge. It's coming up on the Disc Golf Pro Tour. It's the first Elite Series stop since the World Championships, and it's brand new to the tour. It basically replaced the PCS Sula Open, which we were just talking about, because players couldn't get over to Europe. So they dropped it from the Pro Tour, and the TD of the Des Moines Challenge hit up the Pro Tour and said, hey, why don't you come out to our event? It's some very interesting stuff. There was a story about it in the local newspaper. It's been running for 20 years. So this has got a lot of history. And, I don't really think there's ever been a super elite field that has attended the Des Moines Challenge, of course, in Iowa. But now all of a sudden it's going to get the full treatment of, all of these top level professionals showing up. And in fact, the Des Moines Register just published an article about it, which is I think the biggest newspaper in Iowa. We know, obviously Kansas, a big spot for disc golf. And so Tyler Tanat is the TD and has been helping to get this started for this year. And so I think what's really interesting is we've already seen, Josh, some pros talking really favorably about the course that they'll be playing this week.
I was perusing Twitter earlier today and saw Austin Hannum, I believe, called it one of the best courses in the country after finishing a warm-up round. So, I have to confess, I'm not super familiar with the course. It's kind of, we've been focusing so much on Worlds, and like you said, this is the first time it's been on the Pro Tour and had this kind of field. And so I can't speak too well to, I've done what I could to look up and do a little research on it, but this is going to be, I feel a lot like I did before OTB Open or Portland Open, that it was, just events that I was excited to see fresh courses on the Pro Tour. And I think this is something that's been great that we've talked about, that some of the older courses that have been on before, the Memorial, for example, as an event, just kind of fell out because it's just not meeting the pro level of competition, among other reasons. But I think it's good to see these other events get a chance at the spotlight, to be tested, to see what the tournament staff and how they interact with the Pro Tour, and to see how these courses play out. And I think that kind of diversity on the Pro Tour is excellent, and that novelty especially is something that keeps people coming back and watching.
So yeah, it's at Pickard Park, and a highly rated course in Iowa. And I think that this article mentions that Juliana Corver had a hand in designing the course. So I can't say that I know about that, but I'm checking it out right now to see if I can find out. The Pro Gold level layout is 9,700 feet long, and it gets 4.5 stars on UDisc. So popular. It's got a couple of par fives. Fairly open and hilly, but plenty of trees, woods, and water. So I think it's going to be like park style golf would be probably how I would describe this one. So, interesting. We'll see how it goes. I mean, the Pro Tour has definitely debuted some new courses and styles before. Lots of people loving the set layout for the Pro Tour this weekend. And I think, it's the kind of thing where, well, maybe it goes well. I saw Geico Des Moines is sponsoring the tournament. That's a nice get for a sponsorship.
All right, Charlie, you already make some picks?
I sure am. Let's do it.
Okay. I'll let you start. What? Sorry?
Oh, you're going to let me start.
I was going to let you start. You pick division.
I will go ahead and start in FPO.
Okay.
I have nothing to go off here besides the little bit that I've read about the course. So I think here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go from 5 to 1. Good field, by the way. I'm going to take Missy Gannon in the 5 spot. I'm going to take Sarah Hokum in the 4 spot. Katrina Allen in the 3 spot. Paige Pierce in the 2 spot. And Kristen Tatar in the 1 spot. She's got a couple of warm-up tournaments under the belt. and I really liked what I saw. I mean, maybe this is a reach, but I really liked what I saw at Worlds, and I think that she's going to get one, and maybe it'll be here at the Des Moines Challenge. So that's my pick in FPO. How about you?
I have Juliana Korver in the 5 spot.
All
of course, if she had that hand in the course design. Plus, I mean, Juliana's been playing great. So I've got Juliana in the 5 spot. I have Kona Panis in the 4 spot.
All right.
I have Paige Pierce in the 3 spot. I have Kristen Tatar in the 2nd. And I'm going to give the nod to world champion Katrina Allen for the number 1. So no reason to pick against her right now. I think she's gonna let her have a weekend to prove me wrong. So, all right,
MPO, you go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna start in my 5 spot as well for MPO. In number 5, I'm gonna put Nathan Queen.
Wow.
Yeah, now I want to point out there are like 25 players who are 1020 and above right now. Registered at this tournament. So it's a new course. It's not one that's been on the Pro Tour. It feels fresh. I want to give a fresh face a look, and I think Nathan Queen's going to be my one to do it. Bit of a reach, maybe, we'll see, but put Nathan Queen in the 5 spot. From there, I would say I've got Adam Hammis in the 4 spot. Now, see, I've done something where I've left off a player that I kind of wanted in there. I'm putting Kevin Jones in the 3 spot. I'm putting Ricky in the 2 spot and Calvin Heimberg in the 1. Yes, that means I'm leaving off Mr. Macbeth. More of a fault of error of counting.
And Mr. Conrad.
No, Mr. Conrad. And I actually have an over-under for you, Charlie. But I guess it's actually your week to pick it if you want. So
No, if you have one ready to go, hit me with it.
Go ahead and make your picks first, and then I'll hit you with the over-under.
Okay, you got it.
Okay.
Park Golf. I'm calling for a Nico Locastro bounce back. I'm going to put him in my 5 spot. I really like Kevin Jones. I think he's going to be higher up my list. I'm going Calvin Heimberg in the 4. I'm going Macbeth in the 3, Heimberg in the 2, and Kevin Jones about to get that dub, and he's going to get the 1 spot and win the Des Moines Challenge. So it's not a world championship, but it's still an Elite Series event. All
right. You didn't have James Conrad in your top 5 then.
This is unbelievable disrespect for the world champion right now.
That's twice. Okay, and I will say the Majestic, I think last weekend maybe didn't get quite enough coverage. There was a Silver Series that ran Clash of Canyons that ran over it, but it's noteworthy. James Conrad took 12th at the Majestic this last weekend.
He was just chilling.
He was just chilling.
Come on.
Here's the question.
Like wearing the trophy around his neck. Of course he didn't throw it far.
You'd hear James walking down the fairway with the bell ringing as he was going. He carried nothing but an envy and an entropy on the entire round with the bell ringing around his neck. Okay, anyway, my over-under for you, Charlie. James Conrad in 8th place. So we'll say, let's do, I don't want to be too generous. I don't want to make it too hard. The 8.5 spot. 8.5. So the line's 8.5.
I'm going to take the under, meaning I think he's going to finish worse than 8.5.
Okay.
It's just, it's World's hangover time. I just think like he finished 12th at the Majestic, which didn't have a crazy field like this. And it's fine. It's fine. He's probably going to just have a couple tournaments where he doesn't light it up. And I think that's totally okay. So that's where I've got him.
Okay. We did pick Katrina Allen up to 1st and 2nd place for our FPO picks, right?
I understand.
Okay.
But
okay.
It's a different kind of player. It's a different kind of person. It's a different kind of division.
Okay. Just checking.
Just chilling in his van right now.
Ringing his bell.
Yeah. So you're taking the other side? You're happy with the other side?
I'll take the over. I dropped the line just a little bit. I was almost going to do the 7.5, but I made an outrageous bet last time and lost hard. So we're tied up at 2-2. Hopefully,
2-2.
Sliding it down just a little bit will.
All right, everybody, make your picks at home and join the game. James Conrad going to keep it rolling, or is he going to just be chilling? We'll see. That is going to do it for this week's edition of the Upshot. please make sure to join us for our subscriber-only bonus segment. We're going to be talking a little bit about Worlds timing. Did we like it at the end of June? Should it be later? What is the deal with Worlds? It is considered, I think, pretty broadly the most important major. So what does that mean about where it should be on the calendar? We're going to be talking about that in our subscriber bonus segment. You can become a subscriber for less than $4 a month at discgolf.ultiworld.com/subscribe. For Josh Mansfield, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on The Upshot.